Welcome, Fritz, to London. Pleased to have you back. You were here last in 2012 to give the annual lecture. What has changed in Germany since then? I mean, we read that the green energy transition is finished. We had a former Secretary of State saying there was no energy generated for a few weeks this winter, so therefore the Energiewende is kaput.
Not so quick, not so fast, Benny. I think the system is much more resilient as we thought. The first part of the Energiewende that was closing down the nuclear plants, 30% of the power, now we have the second part, that means also to get rid of coal. And until now, we see that coal is the backup for the Energiewende. If we would not have lignite and coal, it would be plunging immediately. We have other reasons that we are not in really serious problems. We have 9 neighbor countries, where we can put the overcapacity when wind is too much there as waste energy to Poland, to Switzerland, whatever. We have this as a third reason, that it is working, that we have a grid which is really over-engineered by German engineers. You know, they are very carefully looking that nothing goes wrong, and from that point we are profiting on these old engineering tradition. But every year the renewable is mounting. We see that the problems are lurking behind the corner, and I think in the next 2 to 5 years we will see whether we are really in a dead end.
Okay, so the lights are still on, electricity is still generated, most of the nuclear power plants have been shut down. My understanding is still 40% of electricity is generated by coal, but this is now supposedly being phased out. The whole thing costs about 25 billion a year, but CO2 emissions are rising. Something isn't going the right direction. So you spend like crazy, but CO2 emissions are going up. How is that possible?
That is coming out of the system of the Renewable Act. The wind and solar power is going to the exchange for zero. So, and it is required that it comes first. So 30% of the power is going to the exchange and shifting all other productions like hard coal, gas out of the market. And the costs are 25 billion for the renewables, but they shift away the production of gas and hard coal, which is a little bit lower than lignite. So the effect is not a CO2 reduction. So that is a...
So are you saying the direct effect of prioritizing renewables makes coal actually more competitive?
Makes the cheap coal more competitive, and the cheaper coal is the lignite and some newer coal plants, and gas has no chance in that scheme, and gas is a little bit lower in their CO2 emission. That is a contradictory in itself. Therefore, you see, we are stable in emissions. We are also stable in consumption of electricity. This have been not reduced. that was a target of the government, minus 20% until 2020. They will never achieve that, and they will also never achieve minus 25% in CO2.
Right. So every household in Germany now has to pay roughly 300 euros per year to subsidize the wealthy landowners and the farmers and the people with big houses who invest in renewables. But there doesn't seem to be any real outrage about it.
Yes, that is interesting to see, but I think this is covered up by the very good economic situation in which Germany is. In other circumstances, that would be a totally different picture, to have an additional load on households, not only on households but also on enterprises. Beside the steel and aluminium production, which is relief from the renewable levy, that is the extra load by the renewable law is double of the exchange price. It is it's a heavy load, but the population, I think, and the households, they have been told you have to pay this to save the world, and one of the reasons that there is a little bit complacency in that respect is that government achieved that people in Germany has a bad conscience and said, okay, we have done wrong things, we have to do now a little bit an extra burden to help the world. That is only working in good times, and we are in good times in Germany.
Right. And so there is very little party political opposition.
There is no party political opposition in the parliament, none.
But I understand that there is growing local opposition to some of the projects of the Energiewende.
Yes.
And where does that come from?
That is interesting to see, that the opposition is also coming from the outer parliamentary movement. That was in the 70s with the nuclear. There was also unanimous support in the parliament for nuclear, and now we have unanimous support for wind and solar. But you see, in the rural areas, we see that the people are saying the urban elites are realizing their dreams of a sustainable electricity, energy, on the loss of our homeland, on the destroy, and they see that their surrounding is destroyed, and there are 800 initiatives fighting against new wind farms, which are now placed more and more in the near of urban areas on the one hand, because they need space. That is the problem for renewables. They need a lot of space. And the second is they are going now into forests, into very sensible areas where bird is now endangered, and therefore is a huge resistance. It is coming from a natural movement. So it is very interesting. There is a new green movement against the green price, the political price, who's saying we have to do this, we have to destroy the German nature to help the earth. And I'm quite sure that this is the most decisive point in the next 5 years, and that movement will come to parliament in different parties, in the Liberals or the AfD, whatever, will come to the parliament and will speak out what happens in reality in the rural areas.
And tell me a little bit about these divisions among conservationist movement in Germany. So you have the big green NGOs who are all campaigning for renewable energy, and then you have conservationists who are concerned about the negative impact of these projects on the environment, on wildlife. You yourself are chairman of a wildlife foundation. How do you deal with this division within the environmental movement?
So what we see is that we don't see any implication until now by climate change. But what we see is that biodiversity is really destroyed by the measures against climate change. So we see that, for instance, very important birds of prey like the red kite, we have investigated as foundation this, is really endangered by wind farms. We have 1,000 sacrifices per year, and we have only 12,000, 14,000 in Germany. So it is foreseeable that in 10 to 15 years he's not there, and therefore we have the Green movement has a big problem. The Green Party has decided to go that way, whatever it cost, whatever in nature it cost, and therefore you see now that the natural organization, the nature organizations, are splitting. They are splitting. One who are supporting the, let's say, the official political view. We have to save the world, and even if we have to destroy our own nature. And there are more and more stepping out of this movement and say we are creating new forms of initiatives. Even new organizations have been founded who say no, nature conservation is our first target, and all other targets have to be in a second row, where the official green line is totally different.
It's very interesting to hear about these splits and divisions, because obviously Germany always has a kind of trailblazing tradition in environmental policy making and thinking and so on. So do you think that with the growing number of renewable energy projects, and we're talking about wind farms, solar farms, biofuels, deforestation for biofuels, wood pellets, and all sorts of big projects that have a strong impact on the environment, do you see that this division will actually happen in other parts of the world?
I think we in that way we are also really the vanguard, because we are very developed in that sense. On the other hand, we have a very romantic and nature-orientated tradition in Germany. So I don't know what how France and UK and others are looking at this. But if you imagine that to fulfill the targets of the Energiewende in Germany, to build 55,000 wind turbines, and if you spread it over the country, then you have every 2.7 kilometer a turbine, and then you can imagine that you are totally shifting the landscape, that you destroying nature which needs these landscape, and we know that with our investigations say that turbines are now killing 240,000 bats, because the bats are living in a forest, and the wind turbine needs a street to its point through the forest, and the bats are flying through the free space to the turbine. So they are attracted by the turbine. And they are clever animals. They see the rotors by their radar system. And they are going through the rotors. But what they don't know is that behind the rotor there is a low pressure, and the low pressure bursts their lungs, and they then are killed. And that is something which is by law forbidden. You cannot place something where you systematically kill endangered species. The policy is looking away of that. But the people more and more hint on that. And therefore I think that is really the most important thing to change the way of energy policy in Germany. Not the cost, maybe the stability of the grid, which is also something which really every person is concerned about. But the nature is a thing which at the end is underestimated by the government.
And how do you explain the either silence or even ignorance of the green NGOs when it comes to manifest destruction of environments and animals?
But honestly speaking, the Green Party has never been a really natural conservation party. Never. It was from the very beginning a left party who need a green cloak, a camouflage. Their target was to change society, to transform it, and they needed a good argument for that. And the best argument they could found is, if you don't fight against industry, against technology, against capitalism, we will burn the world. And this message went to the brains of the people, and that reached the people. They have, they believe them, that is true, because that is the main cause for all these Energiewende. What is it? Why are we doing such silly things to pay for wind farms if they are not able to bring the electricity into the grid because the grid is full, because there is too much wind in that area? We pay for it. We pay for something which has never been produced. That is silly. But why do we this? We do this because there is such a big motion behind that, and that is the climate, the climate catastrophe which we are expecting. That is the driver of all that things, and therefore the Green have no sensors for the natural scene. They are not. That's not really their thing.
Right. And if they are so concerned about the climate, as you say,
Yeah, that's
which is something perhaps also questionable, why are they against nuclear energy? Because you could argue, if you really want to decarbonize, the best way of decarbonizing is to build nuclear power plants. So that doesn't add up.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. The beginning of the movement of the Greens was the fight against nuclear. Also nuclear, not only nuclear power, but also nuclear arms. And that is the same source where we came out. And therefore you're right, that is a contradiction I cannot explain, because you are right. It was very silly to step out of nuclear, because after Fukushima we were the only country who stepped out within a week. And even you look to Japan, where the failure has been made, they are already again in, and no other country followed us. And to think that you can substitute a cheap and CO2-free energy by intermittent, expensive energy, that is one of the silly things of the German Energiewende. It was the government Schröder who has said, okay, 2032, we will fade out. So we had then from 25 years to really make a prudent step to a new energy system. But what we are doing now is really a bumping road which we cross.
In Germany, there are about 1 million families that are benefiting directly from the transition, in either because they own land or they are farmers, or they have solar panels on their houses. These are the wealthiest families and the most influential families in Germany.
Yeah.
Is there any scenario where realism comes back and the government actually says, hold on, perhaps this is not the best for our nation?
You are right, there are huge vested interest. For a turbine, you receive 75,000 euro per year, and that 20 years for
just
20
for
years.
The piece of land.
Just for the piece of land. And you are also right, it is a social transfer from the working class and the lower, the poor people to the rich, because the poor people have to pay it, and they have no land and they have no roof to profit from that. That is something which happens already, but it leads not to an implosion of the system. I think the system has 3 challenges. The first is, will climate change really happen in that way that what our IPCC has told us? What is in the next 10 years if temperature is not going up? Then the people will doubt for 30 years, you are wrong, why should you be right for the next 100 years? The second is the stability of the grid is more and more in danger. If you have only a blackout for 2 or 1 day, that is a huge disaster. And the third, I think, is really the destruction of nature in Germany. That is a growing concern. And if you steal the Germans their forest, you should not underestimate the power which can grow out of this mood.
Fritz, thank you very much. You will give, obviously, your talk tonight in the House of Commons, and we're all looking forward to your talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Benny.